At 65, Pamela Richardson expected bad days. But not this. She didn't feel the pain when she hit the floor. She felt the humiliation. Her life savings, $4,700, were scattered across the bank like trash while the teller glared down at her. "Suspicious funds," he accused. Customers whispered. Her hands shook. And then footsteps and a shadow, followed by a voice like thunder behind her, sliced through the room. "Pick up her money. Now." She looked up, and her entire life shifted. 3 hours earlier, Pamela had stood in front of her bathroom mirror, practicing. "I'd like to make a deposit." Her reflection smiled back, hopeful but tired. The woman in the mirror had worked for 47 years as a housekeeper, had raised 2 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident, had watched her youngest daughter, Michelle, struggle through breast cancer while caring for her own daughter, 8-year-old Jasmine. The envelope sat on the dresser beside a stack of receipts, each one carefully dated and signed. Mrs. Whitmore, $600 per month. The Henderson family, $450. Dr. Patricia Morgan, $700. She paid extra because Pamela also cooked. 5 families total, all documented, all legitimate. Jasmine needed braces. College would come faster than anyone was ready for. And Pamela had promised that her granddaughter wouldn't start life drowning in debt the way Michelle had. So she'd walked 3 miles each way to save bus fare, had eaten canned soup and day-old bread from the discount rack, had worn the same 3 outfits in rotation, mending them until the fabric showed more stitches than the original cloth. The envelope represented more than money. It represented proof that Pamela Richardson still mattered, that her labor had value, that she could still build something, protect someone, and make a difference. She'd chosen First National because it was the bank Michelle used, because the building looked solid, permanent, trustworthy, because walking through those heavy glass doors felt like walking into a better future. The reality was colder than the marble floor. Derek, the nameplate said Derek, had glanced at the cash, then at Pamela, then back at the cash with an expression that made her stomach drop. Not confusion, not curiosity, disgust. Where did you get this money? The question itself wasn't unreasonable. Large cash deposits triggered protocols. Pamela knew that. But the way he asked, voice raised just enough to carry, eyes narrowed with presumption, transformed a standard procedure into an accusation. "I worked for it," Pamela said, hating how her voice wavered. "I clean houses. I have receipts." "Right." Derek's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "And I'm supposed to believe someone like you just happened to save almost $5,000? Someone like you." The words landed like a slap. Around them, the bank's morning crowd began to notice. An elderly white woman in a lavender cardigan clutched her purse closer. A businessman in line muttered something to his colleague, both turning to stare. Pamela's hands shook as she fumbled for the receipts, years of accumulated proof that she was exactly who she claimed to be. But Derek wasn't interested. "We have protocols for suspicious deposits, ma'am. Money laundering is a federal crime. I'm going to need to call my manager." The room tilted. Heat flooded Pamela's face. Shame, rage, helplessness swirling together into something that felt like drowning. She'd done everything right. Worked honestly, documented carefully, and saved responsibly. And still this boy, this child who probably spent more on weekend bar tabs than Pamela spent on groceries in a month, looked at her like she was a criminal. "Please," she whispered. "I just want to deposit my money." "Step aside, ma'am." That's when she dropped the envelope. Her fingers, suddenly nerveless, couldn't hold on. Bills fluttered to the floor in slow motion, and Pamela watched her dignity scatter across marble that cost more than her annual income. She knelt, to gather them while Derek watched, making no move to help. "Someone like you. Pick up her money. Now." The voice came from behind, but its effect was instantaneous and electric. Derek's face drained of color. The whispering customers fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of the bank, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the hum of fluorescent lights, seemed to hold their breath. Pamela looked up from her position on the floor. The man standing behind her was young, 33, maybe 35, but carried himself with a kind of authority that had nothing to do with age. His charcoal three-piece suit was immaculate, tailored to perfection. Italian leather shoes, probably worth more than Pamela's car. Dark hair slicked back, strong jaw, and eyes that held something ancient and utterly remorseless. But it was his presence that froze the room. An apex predator in a building full of prey. Sir, I'm following bank protocol," Derek stammered. "No." The man's voice remained calm, conversational even, but underneath ran a current of such absolute certainty that contradiction seemed impossible. "You're humiliating an elderly woman who came here to deposit money she earned. And you're going to fix that. Right now." He stepped forward, movement fluid and controlled, and placed a business card on the counter. Pamela could see it from the floor. Heavy cardstock, expensive, with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. "Call that number," the man continued, his tone unchanged, still pleasant and still terrifying. "Ask for Vincent. Tell him James Castellano is standing in your bank, watching you disrespect someone's grandmother." James Castellano. The name detonated in the silence. Pamela saw recognition explode across Derek's face. Recognition, then fear, then something close to panic. She didn't know the name, but clearly, everyone else did. Derek's hands shook as he picked up Pamela's scattered bills, fingers fumbling, and breath coming in shallow gasps. I'm sorry, ma'am. I apologize. Let me process this right away. No manager needed. No problem at all." James turned his attention to Pamela, and his expression underwent a transformation that was somehow more unnerving than his anger. His features softened. His eyes, which had been chips of obsidian, warmed to something almost human. He crouched down beside her, this dangerous man in his expensive suit, lowering himself to the floor of a bank lobby, and held out his hand. "Let me help you up, ma'am." Pamela stared at his offered hand. Strong, callous despite the obvious wealth, with scars across the knuckles that spoke of violence she couldn't begin to imagine. She should refuse. Should thank him politely and leave before she got tangled in whatever world produced a man like this. Instead, she took his hand. He lifted her easily, steadying her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way he held himself like a man carrying an impossible weight. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Pamela nodded, still unable to speak. Derek was now frantically processing her deposit, counting bills with military precision, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. James didn't move away. He stayed beside her, a silent sentinel, until Derek finished and handed Pamela her receipt with a stammered apology that felt as sincere as it was terrified. "Anything else you need, ma'am?" Derek's voice cracked. "Anything at all?" Pamela shook her head, clutching her receipt like a life preserver. James placed a hand on her elbow, gentle, steadying, and guided her toward the exit. And Pamela, God help her, let him. The Mercedes was black, sleek, and probably cost more than Pamela's house. James held the passenger door open, one hand on the frame, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to buy you lunch," he said. "No strings. No expectations. Just, let me do something decent today." Every survival instinct Pamela possessed screamed at her to refuse. This man, whoever he was, whatever he did, was dangerous. The way Derek had reacted, the fear in that boy's eyes, meant James Castellano was someone you avoided, not someone you had lunch with. But there was something in James's face. A grief so deep it had carved permanent lines around his mouth. A loneliness that echoed Pamela's own. "All right," she heard herself say. The restaurant was the kind of place Pamela had only seen in magazines. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in formal attire who treated James like visiting royalty. They were seated immediately at a corner table with a view of the city, and Pamela tried not to think about the fact that her entire outfit probably cost less than a single appetizer here. James ordered wine, something French and expensive, and waited until it was poured before speaking. "My mother was a housekeeper," he said abruptly, staring at his glass. "Maria Castellano. She raised me alone after my father was killed when I was 10. Cleaned houses from dawn until dark, 6 days a week, just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table." Pamela watched his face transform with memory. Pain, yes, but also love, fierce and undiminished by time. "She worked for this wealthy family on the North Side," James continued. "The Kensingtons. Big house, 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, marble everywhere. Mrs. Kensington treated my mother like furniture. Invisible until she needed something. Then suddenly Ma wasn't working fast enough, wasn't cleaning thoroughly enough, wasn't grateful enough for the opportunity." His fingers tightened around the wine glass, knuckles whitening. "One day, Ma collapsed. Heart attack. Right there on their Italian tile while scrubbing the floor. Mrs. Kensington called 911, sure, but you know what she did first? She complained that Ma was bleeding on the grout. Said it would stain." Pamela's breath caught. "Ma died 3 days later. I was 15. And I remember sitting in that hospital, watching her slip away, thinking about how she'd spent her whole life being invisible, being disrespected, being treated like she was worth less than the dirt she cleaned." James finally looked up, meeting Pamela's eyes. "I'm not a good man, Mrs. Richardson. I've done things, terrible things, that would make you sick if you knew the details. I've hurt people, destroyed families, built an empire on fear and violence. But I remember what it felt like to watch my mother come home exhausted every night, hands raw from chemicals, back bent from labor, and see that look in her eyes. That broken look, like the world had convinced her she deserved to be treated that way." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him like heat. "I saw that same look on your face today, and I thought, just once, just this one time, I could be the person who stood up for someone instead of tearing them down. I could be the son my mother deserved to have." Pamela felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the table, ignoring protocol and propriety and every boundary that should exist between strangers, and placed her hand over his. "Your mother would be proud of what you did today," she said softly. James's smile was broken, disbelieving. Would she? Would she be proud of the rest? "I don't know about the rest," Pamela said honestly. "But today, yes, today, you were exactly the son she raised you to be." 3 days later, Pamela was leaving the Whitmore residence when her world exploded into violence. Thursday afternoon, 4:15 p.m., the sun was already beginning its descent into a gray November sky. She'd just finished the weekly deep clean, bathroom scrubbed, floors mopped, laundry folded and put away, and was walking toward the bus stop, her worn purse slung over her shoulder, thinking about what to make Jasmine for dinner. The black van appeared from nowhere. One moment, the street was empty except for parked cars and the distant sound of children playing. The next, screeching tires, the van's side door sliding open, rough hands grabbing her arms, her waist, lifting her off the ground. Pamela tried to scream, tried to fight, but a cloth pressed against her face, chemical sweet and suffocating, and darkness swallowed everything. She woke to cold. Bone-deep, seeping cold that made her teeth chatter and her joints ache. Her wrists were bound, zip ties, cutting into skin, securing her to a metal chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Rust stains on concrete walls. Broken windows letting in weak afternoon light. The smell of decay and motor oil. 3 men stood in front of her. 2 were muscle, thick-necked, dead-eyed, hands resting on visible firearms. The third was older, maybe 60, with silver hair styled like a businessman and a suit that probably cost 5 figures. He smiled at her with all the warmth of a shark. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, his voice smooth, cultured, terrifying in its politeness. "I apologize for the dramatic introduction. My name is Victor Giordano, and you're going to help me send a message to James Castellano." Pamela's mind raced, terror giving way to confusion. I barely know him. We had lunch once." But James doesn't do lunch." Victor stepped closer, his smile never wavering. "James Castellano doesn't defend random old ladies in banks. Doesn't take strangers to expensive restaurants. Doesn't show weakness. Period. But he did all those things for you." He pulled out a phone, showed her a photograph. James is leaving the Italian restaurant, his hand on Pamela's elbow, his body angled protectively. Someone had been watching them, following them. "James has been expanding," Victor continued, pacing now, hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. "Taking contracts that were promised to me. Absorbing operations in territories where we had agreements. Disrespecting arrangements that have kept this city stable for 20 years. He stopped, turning to face her fully. "I've tried reason, tried negotiation, tried threats. Nothing works because James Castellano doesn't fear anything. Doesn't care about anything except his empire and his reputation. But now..." Victor's smile widened. "Now he has a weakness. You." "No," Pamela whispered, understanding flooding through her with sick certainty. "He doesn't care about me. We're nothing to each other." "Then why did he risk his reputation to defend you? Why did he spend 2 hours having lunch with someone who has nothing to offer him? Why did my people observe him personally driving you home instead of sending one of his crew?" Victor crouched in front of her, his face level with hers. "Your leverage, Mrs. Richardson. And in my world, leverage is everything. We're going to take some pictures, send them to James, and then we're going to see just how much you're worth to him." One of the muscle-bound guards raised a camera, and Pamela realized, with crystalline horror, that James Castellano's one act of kindness had just become her death sentence. The photograph arrived on James's phone at 6:47 p.m. He was in a meeting, 8 men around a mahogany table, discussing distribution routes and protection payments, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting business, and went completely still. Pamela, bound to a chair, terror naked on her face. And behind her, Victor Giordano's unmistakable silver hair, his hand resting on her shoulder like a casual claim of ownership. The text below was brief. Riverside Meatpacking. 1 hour. Alone. Unarmed. Or she dies screaming. The room fell silent. Something in James's face, or maybe the way every muscle in his body had gone rigid, told his crew that the world had just shifted on its axis. Boss. Vincent, his second in command, leaned forward. What is it? James set the phone down carefully, precisely, like he was handling a bomb. His voice, when he spoke, was absolutely calm. Dangerously calm. Victor has the woman from the bank. The housekeeper. The one you had lunch with? Marco, one of his enforcers, looked confused. Why would Victor? Because he's smarter than we thought. James stood, buttoning his suit jacket with methodical precision. He's been watching, waiting for an opening. And I gave him one. He looked around the table at men who'd followed him into every kind of hell, who'd kill and die on his word. Call everyone. Every soldier, every associate, everyone who owes us. I want them at the Riverside plant in 40 minutes. Full loadout. Tactical approach. Victor wants to send a message? Fine. We'll send one back. Vincent stood as well, concern etched across his face. Boss, it could be a trap. He wants you emotional, making mistakes. It's definitely a trap. James's smile was cold, merciless, the expression of a man who'd just decided to burn the world down. But Victor made one critical error. He hurt someone under my protection. He picked up his phone, looking at Pamela's terrified face one more time. And for that, I'm going to kill everyone in that building. The drive to Riverside took 32 minutes. James spent it in absolute silence, staring out the window of his armored Mercedes, while Vincent coordinated their assault force through encrypted channels. 12 men. 4 vehicles. Enough firepower to start a small war. Because that's exactly what this was. James had built his empire on calculated violence. Every move deliberate, every action serving a strategic purpose. He didn't let emotions cloud judgment. Didn't act on impulse. Didn't risk everything for people who couldn't advance his interests. But Maria Castellano's face kept superimposing itself over Pamela's in his mind. His mother, exhausted and invisible. Pamela, humiliated and dismissed. 2 women who'd spent their lives being told they didn't matter. Maybe that's why he'd intervened at the bank. Maybe that's why he'd bought her lunch, listened to her stories about her granddaughter, felt something almost human stirring in the wasteland where his conscience used to live. Or maybe he was just tired of being the monster everyone assumed he was. Either way, Victor had made a fatal miscalculation. James Castellano did have a weakness now. He just hadn't realized it until someone tried to exploit it. The Riverside meatpacking plant had been abandoned for 7 years, ever since health inspectors shut it down for violations that made the newspapers for weeks. Perfect location for exactly this kind of business. Isolated, structurally sound despite the decay, and far enough from residential areas that gunfire wouldn't immediately draw police. Victor had chosen well. But then, Victor always did. James's convoy arrived at 7:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the deadline. They parked a block away, approaching on foot through shadows and side streets, using the darkness and their knowledge of the building's layout. Every crew in the city had used this place at one point or another, to position themselves at 3 entry points. James went through the front door. Not because Victor had demanded it, but because he wanted Victor to see him coming. The main processing floor was vast, empty except for rusted equipment and the smell of old blood that never quite went away. Weak light filtered through grimy windows, creating pools of shadow that could hide anything. Victor stood in the center, beside Pamela's chair, a gun held loosely in his right hand. Four guards surrounded them, weapons raised, clearly expecting James to be alone as instructed. "James!" Victor's voice echoed through the space, warm, almost friendly. "I'm impressed. Exactly on time. I was betting you'd be early. Let your emotions override your tactical sense." James walked forward, hands visible, pace unhurried. He looked at Pamela, her eyes wide, tear-streaked, but alive, unharmed beyond the obvious terror, and felt something loosen in his chest. "Victor," he said conversationally, "you've made some interesting choices today." "Have I?" Victor gestured with his gun, casual, confident. "Seems to me I've finally found your weakness." The great James Castellano, brought to heel by an old housekeeper. "Your mother would be ashamed." "Don't." The word came out flat, lethal. "Don't talk about my mother." Victor laughed. "Sensitive topic? Good. That's useful information. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back from my territories. You're going to return the clients you've stolen. And you're going to publicly acknowledge that I still run the North Side. Do all that, and your girlfriend goes home unharmed." "She's not my girlfriend." "Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air, genuine curiosity in Victor's voice. Because it was a fair question. Why was James here? Why risk everything? His empire, his crew, his life, for a woman he'd known for 3 days. James looked at Pamela, really looked at her, and saw her looking back. Terrified, yes, but not broken, not begging, just waiting, trusting somehow that he hadn't abandoned her. "Because someone should have stood up for my mother," James said quietly. "And I'm tired of being the person who only tears things down." He raised his hand, a simple gesture, barely visible. The building exploded into chaos. Windows shattered as his crew breached from 3 directions simultaneously. Flashbangs detonated, turning the world into strobing white light and deafening noise. Victor's guard spun, trying to target threats that came from everywhere and nowhere, and James's soldiers cut them down with brutal efficiency. Victor raised his gun toward Pamela, instinct, leverage, one last desperate play, and James was already moving, crossing the distance between them in seconds, his hand closing around Victor's wrist with bone-crushing force. "No," James said, and broke Victor's arm. The aftermath was surgical, brutal, and over in 90 seconds. Victor's guards were neutralized, 3 dead, 1 wounded and fleeing, caught 2 blocks away. Victor himself was on his knees, cradling his shattered arm, while James's crew secured the building and swept for additional threats. James ignored all of it. He went directly to Pamela, pulling a knife from his belt and cutting through the zip ties with careful precision. Her wrists were raw, bleeding slightly, and he felt rage surge fresh at the sight. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her arms, checking for injuries with surprising gentleness. "Did they?" "No." Pamela's voice was hoarse, shaking, but steady. "They just scared me. That's all. That's all." As if terror wasn't its own kind of violence. James helped her stand, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. She looked around at the carnage, bodies, blood, his crew moving with military efficiency, and he saw her face change. Not horror, exactly. Something more complex. Recognition, maybe, of who he really was. What he was capable of. "James," she whispered, "what have you done?" "What I always do." His voice had gone cold again, the momentary softness vanishing behind the armor he'd worn for so long. "I protected what's mine." He guided her toward the exit, his hand on her elbow, and tried not to think about how naturally the word mine had come out. Tried not to examine what it meant that he'd started a war for a woman he barely knew. Vincent appeared at his side. "Boss, what do you want us to do with Victor?" James looked back at the silver-haired man, still kneeling, surrounded by James's soldiers. A year ago, hell, a week ago, the answer would have been simple. Permanent. Unmerciful. But Pamela was watching. And James was suddenly, desperately tired of being exactly who everyone expected him to be. "Break the other arm," he said quietly. "Then dump him at County General with a message. He's done in this city. Anyone who works with him answers to me. Clear. Crystal." Vincent smiled, his expression predatory. "Consider it handled." James led Pamela out into the night, where his Mercedes waited. He opened the passenger door, helped her inside, and only then realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the sudden vertiginous understanding of how close he'd come to losing something he hadn't even realized mattered. He drove her to one of his safe houses, a luxury penthouse in the financial district, with bulletproof windows, armed guards, and security systems that could withstand a siege. Overkill, probably. But after tonight, he wasn't taking chances. Inside, he made her tea while she sat on his couch, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling occasionally from shock and adrenaline. When he handed her the cup, hands that had killed men hours before, now offering comfort, she took it without hesitation. "You need to understand who I am," James said, sitting across from her, elbows on his knees. "I run drugs, guns, protection rackets. I've killed people, ordered more deaths than I can count. I'm going to prison someday, or I'm going to die violently. That's my reality." He looked at her, forcing himself to be completely honest. "And now, because I was selfish enough to involve you, it's your reality too. Victor's crew is destroyed, but there will be others. Always others. Anyone who wants to hurt me will look at you and see an opportunity." Pamela set down her teacup, hands finally steady. She met his eyes with a directness that reminded him of his mother. "Why did you really help me that day?" James's mask cracked. The armor fell away, leaving only exhaustion and longing and the ghost of the boy he used to be. "Because I'm tired of being the monster everyone thinks I am. Because for one moment, I wanted to be the son my mother deserved. Because you reminded me that decent people still exist, and maybe I could protect something good instead of destroying it." The confession hung between them, raw and painful. Pamela surprised him. She set down her cup, stood, crossed to where he sat, and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then let me stay." 6 months later, Pamela stood in the kitchen of James's guest house, a converted carriage house on his estate, beautifully appointed, hers alone, and made coffee while dawn broke over the city. The arrangement was unconventional. She lived here, under his protection, but maintained her independence. She still cleaned houses, now for James's legitimate business associates, who paid double her old rate and treated her with nervous respect. She'd opened a proper savings account at a different bank, where the manager personally handled her deposits. Jasmine visited every Sunday, initially terrified of the armed guards and the massive estate, but gradually relaxing when she realized her grandmother was not only safe but genuinely happy. The braces were paid for. A college fund was growing, and Pamela walked through the world differently now. Head higher, shoulders back, carrying herself like a woman who knew her worth. James had changed, too. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, Pamela noticed. He consulted her before making decisions, asking her opinion on matters that affected ordinary people. His organization shifted. Less random violence, more strategic thinking. Protection that actually protected, rather than extorted. "You're making me soft," he complained once, though his smile suggested he didn't entirely mind. "I'm making you human," Pamela had corrected. "There's a difference." The bank teller, Derek, had been arrested 4 months ago. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, the same crimes he'd accused Pamela of committing. The FBI had been investigating for over a year. Justice came in unexpected forms. Today was Pamela's 73rd birthday. James had planned something. She didn't know what, but Vincent had been suspiciously cheerful all week, and the kitchen staff had been baking for days. She smiled, sipping her coffee, watching the sun rise over landscaped gardens she'd once only seen in magazines. A year ago, she'd been invisible, dismissed, humiliated in a bank lobby while strangers watched and judged. She'd thought that moment would break her, that she'd never recover from the shame. Instead, it had led her here, to a strange, unlikely family, to safety and respect, and purpose, to a young man who'd been drowning in darkness until she'd thrown him a lifeline without even realizing it. Not a fairy tale, not a romance, just 2 broken people who'd found in each other something worth protecting. James appeared in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour, holding a wrapped box. "Happy birthday," he said softly. Pamela smiled at the man who'd become, against all odds, like a son to her. "Thank you for standing up," she said. "For defending her. For choosing kindness. For proving that redemption was possible, even in the darkest places." He understood. He always did. "Thank you for staying," he replied. And that, Pamela thought, was enough. Where are you watching from? If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. What would you have done in Pamela's place? Tell us in the comments.